Okay, can everybody hear me okay? All right.
Yes.
Well, good evening. It is a blessing to be here with all of you. My name is Apostle Arnold M. Culbreth, and I hail from the great state of Ohio in Cincinnati. And I serve as the Director of Ministry Engagement with the Douglas Leadership Institute. This call, as you know, is a joint call between two sister organizations, both chaired by Pastor Dean Nelson. The Douglas Leadership Institute is a 501c3, and the Frederick Douglass Foundation is a 501c4. And depending on the project and the initiative, we will partner together and do things for the sake of the kingdom and the shifting of the culture. It blesses me to look around the screen and just see all the diversity, see all the cities and states represented. And we just bless you in the name of the Lord for all of the work that you all are doing personally and professionally to glorify the Lord and to impact your cities and states to the glory of God. I'm going to open us up with a word of prayer. If you are on this call and you may want to know more about the Douglas Leadership Institute, I cordially invite you to join me tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock a.m. Eastern Time for a virtual roundtable, a 60-minute virtual roundtable where, we'll let you look under the hood and kick the tires, and we'll talk a little bit more about the who, what, when, where, why, and how of the Douglas Leadership Institute. I've put all of the login credentials for that Zoom call in the chat. So if you want to grab that, so when you get off of this call, you'll still have it. And if there are other pastors and leaders that you know of that you think would benefit from joining us, you're certainly welcome to forward that information to them and invite them to join us as well. Let me open us in a word of prayer. Once I've concluded, I'm going to turn it over to Reverend Nelson, and then we're going to get into a great discussion with Mr. Bob Woodson. If you've been following us, then you know that we had him on before, and he's back by popular demand for a second time. I don't know how that's going to cause our other previous featured guests to feel, but but he's making history coming back to us the second time. Let's pray. Father, we love you and we honor you and we bless your name. Holy Spirit, we acknowledge your presence. We acknowledge that you're here and that you're moving. We thank you that you're moving in us. We thank you that you're moving around us. And we thank you that ultimately you desire to move through us. Father, thank you for all of the men and women of God on this call, Father, whether they're on the nonprofit side or whether they're more in the political sphere. We thank you for all of the different facets and functions that you've assigned us to, Father, to carry out your work in the earth. Father, I ask your blessings upon every individual, every organization, every family represented on this call, Father. I pray that in the near days ahead, that you would amaze them with your presence, that you would astound them with your provision, oh God, and that you will continue to bless them with your peace. Father, breathe upon this time now. May it be encouraging, may it be informational, may it be impactful. And we ask all of these things in the mighty name of Jesus. Amen. As I mentioned before, Pastor Dean Nelson is the chairman of the Douglas Leadership Institute and the Frederick Douglass Foundation. If you know him, then you probably love him and respect him and just are honored by the work that we see him doing and the opportunities that we have to partner with him in these two great organizations. So I yield the floor to you, Reverend Nelson, and let's dig in.
Amen. Thank you so much, sir. I appreciate your work and your commitment serving as the Director of Ministry Engagement here at the Douglas Leadership Institute. I want to say welcome to all of you who are part of this call. As you know, should know, every month we host this Leaders Live call with someone within the community who has done significant work. Our goal with this Leaders Live call is to introduce and to engage you with people that you may not be able to connect with on your own. We will have a rebroadcast of this program and all of our programs, typically a week after. That'll be pushed out through social media. So if you have friends who are not members of the Frederick Douglass Foundation or that are not part of our growing leadership network, they can view this, and we will have the opportunity for people to visit our website in the future to be able to visit and see all of the programs that we've done. We've had a fantastic array of leaders, from professional football players like Benjamin Woodson to organizational leaders like Kay Coles James. We've had other leaders from different communities like the Church of God in Christ, one of their senior bishops, Bishop Vincent Matthews, and the list goes on. We enjoyed last month we took a break. The month before that, I believe we enjoyed having Star Parker and also a host of other fantastic guests. And so we invite you to this one. This is the first time that we have had a returning guest. And as Reverend Culbreath said earlier, backed by popular demand. And so I'm going to do a little bit of an introduction for Mr. Bob Woodson, and then we'll get right into it. This evening's topic is going to have a range, but we're going to focus primarily on Mr. Woodson's new book, which was not out the last time that he was on, but we are excited to have him. And we'll extend the discussion to talking a little bit about the history of the Woodson Center. Some of you may know that last week they had a 40th anniversary, and it was a fantastic event. I had the opportunity to be there, where they kind of took a stroll down memory lane, talking about some of the successes that they had the 70s and 80s, 90s, the early 2000s. And so we'll get a little bit of a glimpse of that as well. So let me just give a little bit of a background for those of you who may not know Mr. Woodson. I'm going to be reading straight from a bio that is in this book. If you have not gotten a copy of this most recent book, which is entitled Red, White, and Black: Rescuing American History from Revisionists and Race Hustlers. Fantastic title. And Bob will get into it a little bit in terms of why he felt the need to write this book. But Bob Woodson has devoted his career to helping low-income people transcend their impoverished conditions. Woodson has used his own rise from poverty to assist him as the founder and president of what is now called the Woodson Center, formerly the National Center for Neighborhood Enterprise. After working for the National Urban League, Woodson became a research fellow with the American Enterprise Institute, where he learned effective techniques for self-empowerment. Woodson left AEI in 1981 to create the National Center for Neighborhood Enterprise, a grassroots research and demonstration program emphasizing the importance of empowerment and self-management as effective approaches to ending poverty. Woodson received the prestigious Genius Grant from the MacArthur Foundation in 1990. He sits on the board of the American Association of Enterprise Zones for the the Commission on the National and Community Service, and the Commonwealth Foundation. Woodson also has written extensively on the issues of poverty and empowerment, including his book, Lessons from the Least of These, The Triumphs of Joseph, and How Today's Community Healers are reviving our streets and neighborhoods. Woodson and his wife, Ellen, live in Silver Spring, Maryland. They have 3 children. Thank you so much, Bob Woodson, for being on with us once again.
Well, thank you, Dean. I'm always honored to address your group. I always see my role as threefold. One is to inform, the other is to inspire, and the third, that is more important, is to challenge.
Well, you have certainly done all of those to friends and foes alike. So we're grateful.
Because as my grassroots people say, if you want to go someplace you haven't been, you got to be willing to do something you haven't done. Or if you keep doing what you do, you keep getting what you got. And what I find striking today, that when I was active in the civil rights movement, one of the things that characterized the effectiveness of that movement was the quality of the debate within the movement as to the course forward. I mean, starting at the beginning, even before the civil rights movement and in the early days in the 19th century, there were three strains. There were those who believed that we should go back to Africa. They were the recolonizationists. And then there were the insurrectionists, the Nat Turners of this world. And then there were the accommodationists, Booker T. Washington, who believed, but these three strains were, and the accommodationists wore out. And then you had the Booker T. Du Bois debates. Again, it was a spirited debate as to which course should we follow. And then in the 60s, there was also a spirited debate. The very fact that the dominant strategy in the 60s was legal, that we should be filing lawsuits. And then when the students became restless with the pace of change in Greensboro, and they challenged the Atlanta leadership, Dr. King was sent there to discipline the students and bring them back into the fold. And of course, the students then said, either lead, follow, or get out of the way. And Dr. King wisely decided to go in front of the pack and lead it. And people also don't realize that when Rosa Parks decided to not to get up and yield her seat, this was not supported by leadership in Atlanta either. Civil disobedience was not an accepted part of the movement at that time. And that's why when Dr. King went to Birmingham, he was not welcomed by the leadership. It was the young people who came and supported Dr. King. And so it was just stress and strain. And that's why you have SNCC, you have CORE, and all these other groups. And even within the religious community, the National Baptist Convention, when Dr. King and Y.T. Walker, I'm stepping on your territory now.
That's all right.
So just when Y.T. Walker and Dr. King challenged the National Baptist Convention, and King ran for leadership and lost, that organization split. And then they started the Progressive Baptist Convention, and that split exists today. And so the splintering and debate, the Back to Africa, the Republic of New Africa, the Elijah Muhammad, the Muslims, all of these were healthy evidence of a spirited debate within the Black community as to the course forward. And that served the interest well. It was always about how we were to determine the agenda for the progress of Black people, not people outside. But unfortunately, in the 60s, after the gains of the civil rights movement, that debate has gone. I know as a young civil rights leader, I challenged some of the traditional leadership, and I split with the civil rights leadership in the 60s over the issue of forced busing for integration. I just think that was some of the most self-destructive actions we've ever taken. In other words, I really think the opposite of segregation is desegregation. It is not integration.
Right.
And yet, and then the goal is pluralism. I was told by the leadership at the time when I raised this when I was leading demonstrations in Westchester, Pennsylvania, the home of Baird Rustin. He said, well, your position squares with that of the John Birch Society and the KKK. And so I said, well, if I like classical music and Hitler does, I'm not going to stop liking classical music. That you should not be taking your positions based upon who agrees or disagrees. It's either the truth as you see it or it isn't. And then the straw that broke the camel's back to set me on a whole new course that is that we picketed outside of a pharmaceutical company, Wyeth Laboratories. And when they desegregated, they hired 9 Black PhD chemists. When we asked them to join our movement, they said they got this job because they were qualified, not because of the sacrifices of those people on the line who were janitors, hairdressers, factory workers, just ordinary Black folks. And so when this happened 2 or 3 times, I realized even back then that I was in the wrong struggle. That I saw what was happening is a bait and switch game was going on, where we use the demographics of those in stressful circumstances as the bait. And then when the resources arrive, it is used to benefit people like myself, who at that time had a college degree. Because Dr. King said, what good does it do to have the opportunity to eat in a restaurant of your choosing or live where you choose if you don't have the means to exercise that right?
Mhm.
And so, but I could not interest civil rights leaders at the time in investing in helping low-income Blacks prepare to take advantage of opportunities that were opening. And then, of course, we got Black leadership became a part of partisan political machines, going in to administer these cities with the promise that if you just elect Black folks to positions of authority, it will benefit all Blacks. And then you had another part of the tsunami, and that was the poverty programs, where we've spent 22 trillion in the last 50 years. I knew from the first year that this was going to be horrendous impact on the least of God's children. And what I predicted back then is true today. And so what we have today is the kind of destruction in our urban centers that we're witnessing, that even though they've been under Black political rule for the past 50 years, where all of these inequities are occurring,
That's right.
they are blaming it on systemic racism. I don't know what that is. I did know what it was back under segregation, but I don't know what it is today. And I really think that they're then also throwing the police under the bus. When I remember debating this with Hawk Newman on C-SPAN, when I asked him, if racial discrimination were the sole culprit, tell me why are Blacks suffering in circumstances where their own people are running those systems? And he could not answer that. And I think that's the fundamental contradiction that we're witnessing today. And so all my life, what I've been doing is working on behalf of low-income people of all races, trying to help them to live free. Fighting for freedom is not as difficult as living free. And so I try to help low-income people. And so the strategies that we have employed throughout the last 40 years that I started at the Woodson Center, we've taken the principles, Dean, that operate in the market economy and apply them to the social economy.
Well, one of the things, Bob, that you have written, the subtitle for Red, White, and Black is Rescuing American History from Revisionists and Race Hustlers. You've given us a commentary and a little bit of a history lesson. Tell me why you felt the need, particularly at this time, to write this book, and tell us a little bit about the book, because it's actually a collection of essays. But why did you feel like now was a key time for you to write Red, White, and Black, Rescuing American History from Revisionists and Race Hustlers? When
Nicole Hannah-Jones in 2019 brought together some Black journalists at the New York Times, and they issued a 1619, a special edition of the magazine, where they brought and their message is that America should be defined. Its birthday is really 1619, when the first African slaves arrived on the shores of Virginia, and not 1776. And they published a revisionist version of American history that concluded that America is a slaveocracy, that the Revolutionary War was fought to protect slavery, which is not true. They had to walk it back. But it also defined all whites in America as a consequence as victimizers and benefiting from white privilege, and all Blacks are victims to be compensated and patronized. And so since the progressives were using the birth defect of slavery as their way of bludgeon against the country's values and its foundational principles, I think that the messenger to counter that should also be Black.
Hmm.
And so I assembled not only Black scholars and civic leaders, but activists, not to offer an alternative debate, because I think Americans are tired of this gladiatorial debate. I wanted to really offer something that was inspirational and aspirational alternative narrative to really refute and rebut their presumption. Let me give you one fundamental proposition that they took. One, that the problems facing America today with the out of wedlock birth, the violence, the unemployment, the disparities that you see among large swaths of low income Blacks is related to the legacy of slavery and discrimination. And then therefore, unless and until white people change and become less racist, the deteriorating conditions that exist in the cities will not change. And so what we did in our essays is that we documented the fact that when whites were at their worst, we were at our best. That poverty was never associated with aberrant behavior.
Mm.
People who sharecropping didn't riot or rob banks or steal. And so when I say, so what we document in these essays is that when we were denied access to hotels, we built our own. Every major city had a hotel. When we were denied access to banks and credit, in places like Bronzeville, Texas, Bronzeville is a section of Chicago, we have 731 Black-owned businesses, 100 million in real estate assets. And every other city, there was a Black Wall Street.
Mm-hmm.
And so we document the fact that, and also, Dean, there was no correlation between racism, discrimination, and marriage, the destruction of marriage like we see today. In the 10 years of the Depression between 1930 and 1940, when the unemployment rate among whites was 25%, it was 40% among Blacks. We had the highest marriage rate of any other group in society. Elderly people could walk safely in those communities without fear of being assaulted by their children. And this marriage, Christian faith, and belief in self-determination was the core value, the cultural norms that served as a shield against the kind of self-destruction that we're witnessing today. That up until 1965, 85% of all Black families had a man and a woman raising children. That the kind of self-destruction that you're witnessing now is only 50 years old.
Right.
And one other point that one of our essayists looked at the marriage rate of records of 6 major plantations, and looking at the marriage, 75% of freed slaves had a man and a woman raising children. So we had a nuclear family for a century. From 1865 to 1965, it was the nuclear family, our Christian faith, and a belief in self-determination that has served our well. So I wanted a document so that we could collect this, and we also have developed curriculum from it. We have 15,000 downloads so that some of the poison that is being spread through 1619 can be countered by an accurate history of America that talks about the 20 Blacks who were born slaves who died millionaires.
Well, what you've said is so important. I want to let those who are on with us know that if they visit dlinstitute.org, that's our webpage, they can get a brand new report on the Black family, where we have tried to communicate and chronicle some of the very things that you're stating. And one of those is, I think it was actually written by a doctor, or stated by Dr. Churlin from, I believe he's Johns Hopkins University. Sadly, he said that if you were born Black and during the time period of slavery, you are more likely then to be born in a 2-parent household than you are today. I mean, that's just chilling and sad. I mean, but the reality is that despite slavery, despite Jim Crow, despite the laws that even prevented Blacks from marrying, that Blacks were demonstrating then by the hundreds of thousands that they were forming marital relationships, even if they didn't have a preacher to stand in front of them to do it. The idea of jumping the broom. There were other ways that they demonstrated their commitment to one another in matrimony. And I believe that is an untold story. So thank you for highlighting that. And we want to encourage people to visit dlinstitute.org to get that particular new report on the enduring strength of the Black family. So you mentioned also, Bob, that largely at the turn of the century in the 1900s, early 1900s, places like Tulsa, Oklahoma, Sweet Auburn, in Atlanta, Georgia. You had locations in Rosewood, Florida, where you did have these growing and thriving Black communities with wealthy African Americans. Many people, when they talk about these riots and when racist whites came in and burned down, they don't highlight, in my opinion, enough that the reason they did this is because you had whites that were jealous of how successful Blacks were. Can you talk a little bit about that? I know you've talked specifically about Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Yes, as you say, Tulsa, when you really think of it, in less than 60 years from slavery, Blacks came and built a Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma, the Greenwood section. It was wealthier than the white section of Tulsa. You had 5 Black men who owned their private planes in 1920, owned their own private planes. We had banks, we had bowling alleys, we had all of this richness. And when it was burned down, all they talk about is they don't talk about what was burned down, why it was burned down, but also they don't talk about the recovery from it. That even Senator Langford from there did not know that the Black Wall Street recovered. I saw him on television talking about it. I called him and said, Senator Langford, you need to bone up on this and learn about Tulsa that was rebuilt following the riots.
Wow.
And so it's a story of what I'm saying, that there are people who are hooked on crucifixion. And I say we are a resurrectionist. We look at life through the lens of resurrection, not crucifixion. And that's what we're writing about, how we prospered in the face of and also being in education, that we built. There were 5 high schools, as Walter Williams in his study, in New York, Baltimore, Washington, D.C., Atlanta, and New Orleans. These were Black high schools at the turn of the century that had 50 young people to a class, crumbling buildings, used textbooks, and half the budget is white schools. And every one of those white high schools out-tested every other white school in those cities. And they didn't demand that the standards be diminished so that we could compete. We competed against all the standards at the time because of our belief in our own ability to achieve.
Well, a lot has been said recently, Bob, and you wrote, I thought, a very profound article. I believe this was in, I can't remember, but it was regarding critical race theory, which has emerged and is discussed ad nauseum. But one of the things that I heard someone say was that it wasn't the need of critical race theory in schools during the time period of my parents' generation that the Rosenwald schools had so much success. Why is it that they had success then in the face of Jim Crow and in the face of oppression? And today we're saying that critical race theory, some are arguing that this is something that needs to be applied for equity, but yet we had such success back in a time period when we didn't have this. Can you talk to us a little bit about your thoughts on successes then, now, and why critical race theory is not the answer for success within the Black community?
Well, I believe that experience will always trump an argument, and that a witness is more powerful than an advocate. Mm. And so what we did through these essays is provide testimony, facts. We talked about the education gap between whites and Blacks in the South in 1920 was 3 years. It was 8 years for whites, 5 years for Blacks. Julius Rosenwald, the CEO of Sears, partnered with Booker T. Washington. And at first, Rosenwald was going to build these schools in the Sears factory and send them by train this out. Booker T said, no, we don't want charity. We want investment. So Rosenwald put up $4 million. The Black community, local Black communities raised $4.6 million at the time. Mm-hmm. And together they built, over the course of 20 years, 5,000 Rosenwald schools in the rural South. And as a consequence, a study was done in 2009 that showed that between 1920 and 1940, as a result of the Rosenwald schools, we closed the gap within 6 months. But in less than 20 years, we closed the gap. If we were able to close the gap when racism was enshrined in law, and we were at half of the budgets of the white schools, why can't we close the gap today? Or why are our children failing today in systems run by our own people in these cities with budgets that are 10 times what they were back then?
Right.
Dean, one other quick example of education excellence where we didn't require the way critical race theory demands that we lower the standards because Blacks can't compete. But in 1943, there were no Black naval officers. And Eleanor Roosevelt insisted that they train them. So the Navy selected 16 college-educated Black men to be trained as naval cadets. Well, the Navy said what they were going to do is give these cadets in 8 weeks what they gave white cadets in 16 weeks. So what the Black cadets did, once they found out, they covered their windows in their barracks and stayed up and studied all night. And when they took the test, they scored in the 90th percentile. They said, oh, they cheated. So they took them individually. They scored in the 93rd percentile until 13 of them were commissioned. Dean, today, those test scores is still the highest ever achieved at the Naval Training Academy. And if we were able to do that under circumstances like that, the question is, why do we need to dumb down the standards for our students today?
It's a sad reality when we see that. When I grew up, like many others, there was this idea, I guess we called it achievement culture, where because of the conditions and the racism, and I grew up in a rural part of Virginia, the idea was that you had to be better. And that type of achievement culture, I think, served us well. I want to ask you this. So kind of what you on the outset described as when you first saw these kind of poverty programs that came in, and you recognized that it would be harmful ultimately. Talk to us a little bit more about why you thought that, and is there a way out? And maybe you can lean on some of the examples that you have seen through the Woodson Center over the last 40 years.
Yeah, well, the first year of the poverty program, I was in Pasadena, California, working for a local grassroots organization when I saw the poverty programs arrive. the first year, they really did hire legitimate grassroots leaders. Tommy Jaquette, I can name some of them out in Los Angeles. And what these poverty workers did was they began to raise questions about how local government was being run and how local policies were hurting the poor. And they were making demands that local government change its policies. Well, when the local politicians found out that they were activists being paid by the government to challenge them, the government changed the rules at the end of the first year that required all outreach workers to have college degrees. The second rule they changed is that local poverty agencies had to have 1/3 local government, 1/3 business, and 1/3 community. And so that put the local government and their business cronies in charge of dispensing the money. And what happened is that these politicians began to set up cozy relationships with business people who were real estate brokers, and they leased space for daycare and all at twice the local rate. And they began to inflate the rental cost. Supplying of milk suddenly went up 3 times what it would cost if you could buy it from the store. And so what you did, Dean, 70 cents of every dollar of those 22 trillion went to professional service providers and politicians who determined which problems were fundable, not which ones were solvable. Mm. So that you then created a commodity out of poor people.
Well, it sounds like part of what we're saying is that there are sometimes unintended consequences that occur with perverse incentives. But if you could, from your Woodson principles, because we have a lot of grassroots people on here, we have some younger people that are wanting to make a difference in their community. And I've always appreciated the work of the Woodson Center because it's not top down. It's not necessarily looking to solve problems at the federal level. And we have a culture, both sides of the aisle sometimes are trying to present solutions, from the federal level. But you've always emphasized engaging with grassroots leaders because they're there. But a lot of times no one can hear them, no one can see them, and no one can really get behind them. So what are some of the principles, the Woodson principles that you have outlined that can help to empower local leaders to make a difference in their communities?
I will do those, but I'll also give you an example and one that you can see on 60 Minutes. Because in other words, I believe that the principles of the market economy should apply to the social economy. That's why we have the word enterprise in our name.
Got it.
In our commercial economy, 3% of the people are entrepreneurs, but they generate 70% of the jobs. So you only have, and entrepreneurs tend to be C students, not A students. In other words, A students come back to universities and teach, C students endow. Because smart people have to have all the answers before they act. And when they act, the opportunity's gone.
Wow.
But C students are people who start something, they fail, they start again, and the third time they succeed. So the first Woodson principles here is that the answers to the problem abides in the same zip code the solution abides in the same place as the problem. That you must look for local social entrepreneurs. Miss Kimmy Gray in far northeast Washington, D.C., a 630 unit public housing project run over with drug addicts and high dropout rates. But she was a person as a social entrepreneur. She was abandoned by her husband at age 22 with 5 children, got off welfare and sent all 5 kids to college. When her neighbors said, "How did you do that?" she began to teach her neighbors. And then just 4 of them began to come. They sent their first 4 kids away to college, and the kids came back and saw all the chaos. So the residents took charge and established their own resident management association. and they began to recruit people, and they began to declare war on the drug addicts. I won't take all the time to unpack it. But when they decided that it wasn't the housing authority who was stealing, opening the mailboxes or putting trash in the halls or damaging the place. So when they took responsibility and the place began to clean up, her brother, who was an ex-offender, came and saw what they were doing and told the drug dealers to leave him alone. So that became community healing agents. So the anti-drug efforts came from other brothers who came out of prison and joined in. And once their character changes, their characteristic has an advantage. Long story short, Kimmy Gray, by enlisting the social entrepreneurs in her community, took charge of her community. And then we helped them to achieve management control. They collected the rents. They fired the trash company, hired a local man who hired residents to pick up the trash. The place cleaned up. In 10 years, they sent 600 kids to college, eliminate the drug activity in the community. And it became a model of sobriety, and they started small businesses. Some of your members should go on 60 Minutes, put in the word Bertha Gilkey, Gilkey, 60 Minutes, and you'll see an example of one such successful effort in St. Louis and Cochrane. We trained them. But it shows you how an island of excellence, of economic and social and civic excellence, can be created in some of the most war-torn communities if you empower and resource people within that community that have the respect and therefore are able to exercise social control of that community. If it happened there, it can happen again anywhere in America.
Well, those are great examples, and I'm going to go, Bob, in a few minutes to giving some time to some questions that some of the folks that are on. We want to invite you to put your questions in the chat. If you want, you can raise your hand. We can try to call on you. We have a large group of people. But this is one thing that I have observed, Bob, talking to some grassroots leaders, and where they do have some positive solutions and they're beginning to work, but on occasion they run into, we'll just say, agents that are trying to undermine their success, because if they don't have the quote unquote status quo that's there, then there are people that are working for either the housing authority or other people. They don't want them to have success. I literally have the story of a woman who had success in her community, and then she was hired by the housing authority to come in. And when she started having too much success, they told her to slow things down because she was getting too many people off of welfare, too many people out of it. And she ultimately had to leave because she wasn't willing to stop or to slow down from getting people rescued out of poverty. And so as a result, either she had to leave or they were going to force her to not have success. So talk to us about maybe examples that you know, or how do we help these people fight against those who are entrenched that don't want to see the situation changed?
Well, we have the same problem with Kimmy Gray and Bertha Gilkey. That's why they came to me early on in the 50s and said, Bob, every time in other words, there are rules of the game that if we improve, we lose. And so what I did was I enlisted Jack Kemp, who was a Republican congressman at the time, and he took a group of Republican congressmen out to Kenilworth Parkside and had hearings asking poor people about their success. Asked them, well, how did you get rid of the drug dealers? How did you start small businesses? What are the barriers that are being imposed by the housing authority? The very fact that a group of Republican congressmen were going to a drug-infested neighborhood it made all the news in the local thing. Henry Gonzalez, who had the democratically controlled budget committee, felt compelled to follow suit and hold hearings. And so the residents listed 7 policies that interfere with their ability to self-manage, Dean. The Woodson Center wrote these up in the form of legislation. And then I took him to Jack Kemp. He said, Bob, we are in a minority. If you get me 1 Democrat, I'll get you 100 Republicans. So I recruited Walter Fauntroy. We were together in the civil rights movement.
Yes, sir.
And so we began to have hearings. It's very interesting. The most aggressive opponents of resident management were members of the Black Caucus.
Wow, look at that.
It's on public record. You should hear some of the vile things that were said by members of the caucus against these Black women who were leaders. It's on the record. But what happened, Walter Fauntroy broke ranks and co-sponsored these amendments. And Jim Wright, the leadership within the Democratic Party, supported them. And I got Bill Armstrong, Republican senator, conservative from Colorado, to co-sponsor with Alan Dixon, liberal senator from Illinois. Because if you have an issue that can be clearly demonstrated that's helping poor people, and you present it in a rational way, and you have the right support. The long story short, we passed 93 to 0 in the Senate, 430 to 1 in the House, and President Reagan signed it into law, flanked by myself and 6 resident leaders.
Wow. Well, Giovanni Patterson is a leader from Baltimore, Maryland. I think he attended the event Juneteenth when you spoke in Baltimore. He says, do you think Black people have been used to reintroduce a form of communism in America? I've noticed that these movements embrace a struggle to introduce more authoritarian and Marxist ideas as solutions.
Absolutely. You know, slave traders looked at Blacks as property. Progressives look at them as pawns. A pawn is still a piece of property. They don't really care about the welfare, but they're exploiting America's birth defect of slavery. They're exploiting it. And so part of the way that we can push back is arm people with the ability to speak for themselves. But they're pushing a kind of Marxist. You saw that when George Floyd was killed, it was a demonstration to pursue justice for Blacks. But when they went to Portland, they quickly migrated by expressing justice for Blacks by burning the flag, desecrating the Christian cross, and saying that Christianity is an expression of white supremacy and that the nuclear family is Eurocentric. So, but they are still trying to attach themselves to the Black experience and using it as a means to, I think, push a social. There are 2 types of people. There are some people who are well-intended but ill-advised.
That's right.
Not everybody who's engaging in this understands the gravity of what they're doing. And so that's why it's important for us to give information and try to persuade those people through evidence to change. And we've seen some migration away from them onto this. But there are others who are hardwired to exploiting us, and we must stand up against them.
You know, it's little known, but even during Frederick Douglass's time after slavery, when he was fighting not just for abolition, but for rights for Blacks, that there were, even during that time, socialist interests that tried to attach themselves to his movement. And he soundly rejected them. Douglass, obviously self-made man, understood the importance of hard work, but also was learned enough to understand that the roots of communism and socialism were antithetical to what we would consider to be biblical prosperity, the idea of working hard, the idea of owning your own labor. I mean, he understood that once Blacks got free and could own their own labor, they had a tool that they did not have before to advance their freedom. And that's why you saw, some of the early stages, in the 1900s, where they had federal policies that were against state and federal policies against Blacks for organizing themselves to work. I mean, you had, movements and even laws that were to protect white workers because they knew that Black workers would work for less. And if you had worked for nothing under forced labor, of course, you would be willing to work for a little bit that might be less of what the market would bear. And so that's so important, I think, to highlight as a movement. I want to go back to this question came up in a different way, but I want to pose this to you. We talked earlier today about pitfalls, even on the right. Talk to the folks that are on here, some of the mistakes that those on the right have made and are making that we should be aware of. I know when I first came to Washington, D.C., and I met with you, one of the things that you warned me about was to to have your eyes wide open, because everybody in DC doesn't mean you good, even if they say that they have your principles and values.
First of all, let me commend all of you to read Dean's column in the Daily Wire, Frederick Douglass' other 4th of July speech, in particular timely, 2021. It goes into all of this. I would recommend that you read his column. But no, I really believe that when I came to Washington, that Blacks have no permanent friends or permanent enemies, just permanent issues. And Walter Williams said a lot of times conservatives, he said that well, again, same sort of point, that we should not be, that the first thing they do sometimes when they work with you and they're victorious is sacrifice old friends to appease old enemies. And I have seen this where I have worked closely with some of the leadership in promoting welfare reform, and that has helped the Congress and the Republicans to take over the Senate, the House. Well, the first thing they did once they took over, I was told that, well, we're going to now concentrate on the poverty issue. So I was all excited, and there was a meeting in Georgetown at a townhouse restaurant to talk about poverty on a brown bag lunch. I looked in the closet, there were umbrellas and brown bag lunches. And when I came into the meeting, there were waiters with white gloves serving French wine. And the only thing they were discussing is which consulting firms are going to get contracts and which of their friends were going to get it. There was no discussion of poverty. There was no meaningful commitment to do anything. And the first thing that the leadership did was reach out to Marion Barry, Jesse Jackson, and some of the very people who trashed them. That's why when Paul Ryan, 2012, asked me to introduce him to some low-income people, and I took him around, I said, Paul, I have one condition that you must meet. If I ever hear that you've accepted an invitation from John Lewis to ride on the bus from Selma to Montgomery for the reenactment, our relationship is done. Because people like me will understand that you're just patronizing and trying to pander, and you're not real serious. So that's kind of been my standard. but I establish strategic relationships. Because you can go to any city in the country, you cannot tell me go into any low-income neighborhoods, you can't tell me which political party's in power. I don't think politics is the leading indicator. We must change the culture from within, and we must change from within, and force politicians to embrace. Like we took these changes to the law, we took them from the neighborhood to the politicians and said, we will support you if you support these changes. We didn't go to them and just say, well, we're here to support you. No, we're recruiting you to support our policy changes.
That's a big, big difference. Going there with part of the solution rather than just going there, as my mentor used to say, just happy to be there. I'll say it the way he said, you don't be a happy to be there Negro. That's what he used to tell me, just show up and just be glad that you're there, but go there with purpose. This has been fantastic, Bob. We've run out of time, but I want you to mention a couple of things. One, you have curriculum that you guys are pushing. So talk a little bit about where people can download that curriculum and anything else that you would encourage. There are people on here who run pregnancy centers, which you're familiar with. Our friend Herb Lusk, who has one up there. You have people here who have been working in the educational arena. You have people here who, pastor churches and want to start, private schools. Just, last words other than in addition to the download, but just your encouragement to some of the grassroots leaders who are doing good work and sometimes never get any credit, what you would encourage them to do and to continue to do.
Well, first of all, you can get our free downloads for 1776unites.com, 1776unites.com. We've had 15,000 downloads. You're welcome to it, and it's exciting content, and you'll get a lot from it. But I want all of you to be encouraged, and also reach out to grassroots people in these communities that share your values. They're more than willing to help. Part of what we're doing at 1776 in the Woodson Center is that we're encouraging our Black scholars to reach out to and write more stories about achieving against the odds. People are motivated when they see victories that are possible, not injuries to be avoided. And so we should begin to look for stories of triumphing against the odds, achieving against the odds. And we must have more celebrations of people who are achieving against the odds.
Well, thank you for your example for over 40 years of trying to make things better in different communities, not just Black communities, but many, many diverse communities. And also thank you for just your example of really using your megaphone to help people remember the least of these. And we're grateful for you. We thank God for you. At this point, we're going to turn it back over to Reverend Culbreth to give us any closing announcements. But if you all have not gotten it, this book right here, I would encourage you, Red, White, and Black, Rescuing American History from Revisionists and Race Hustlers. I would encourage you to read it, but also once you read it, if there's some stories that inspire you, put those stories on YouTube, share those stories on a Facebook Live, and maybe it inspires you to write your story to put it out. We need more positive examples within our communities to encourage people that they can overcome. And so thanks again, Bob, for all that you do. Love you much. Reverend Culbreth, the floor is yours.
Wow. That's really all I can say is wow. Mr. Woodson, you are a blessing and a treasure, not only to our community, but the community at large. Thank you for what you do. And there are many of us out here that have not bowed our need to bail and the Democratic Party and bad public policy. So there is hope. But we thank God for you. And again, I just thank God for all of you on this call. And if you want to know more about the Douglas Leadership Institute, feel free to join me tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock a.m. on Zoom. And those credentials are in the chat if you want to grab that before we get off tonight. But be encouraged. I know there's a lot going on in our nation, but I believe that righteousness, justice, liberty, and virtue wins out at the end of the day. So God bless you all. Have a wonderful evening, and we'll see you back next month, the first Tuesday in the month, with another exciting guest. All right. God bless you.